Welcome to this webinar in which I will be explaining the effect of variable lease payments based on index or market review on ROU lease liability and ROU asset. I'm your host for this webinar. Just to give you a brief introduction about myself, I'm Michelle Manzoor, an accounting and finance consultant at Lease Info. I did my master's in professional accounting at University of New South Wales and have been working on IFRS 16 accounting standard since a considerable amount of time. I help clients in the implementation of IFRS 16 and work with them to make IFRS 16 Capitaliser more robust and effective tool. This video will cover exactly those leases that contain CPI or market rent reviews. I will take a hypothetical example to show you how leases that contain CPI or market rent reviews would require a restatement of ROU lease liability and ROU asset once the CPI has been released or market rent review is known. I will spend a few minutes letting you know the impact on depreciation expense or interest expense due to restatement of ROU lease liability and ROU asset. So let's discuss the restatement of ROU lease liability and ROU asset. At the date of initial application, a lessee measures the lease liability as the present value of all the lease payments that are due to be paid in the future period. These lease payments are calculated based on rent reviews that are known at the transition date. For example, fixed rent review increases of initial base rent. If the lease payments comprise of lease payments that depend on an index or market review, for example, consumer price index, then ROU lease liability at transition date will be calculated as the present value of lease payments, excluding any CPI or market review that are unknown at the transition date. Once the CPI or market review are known in the future, the ROU lease liability is remeasured subsequently on the release date with the same adjusted to the ROU asset. Before we take a hypothetical example of a lease that includes Australian CPI rent review, it is important to first mention the Australian CPI release dates. You can observe from the date schedule that CPI movements are released on the last Wednesday of the month after each quarter ends. Lessee remeasures lease liability using revised lease payments that are reviewed from the second year of lease commencement date. So now let's start with a hypothetical example. For example, XYZ is the lessee of a shop in OBC Shopping Center. The lease identifier is XYZ01. The date of initial application is 1st January 2019. The lease commences on 1st January 2018 and expires on 31st December 2023. So the lease term is for 6 years. The initial base rent is $40,000. This is net lease, so there are no outgoings. The rent review takes place from the second year of anniversary of lease commencement date annually. The rent review is based on consumer price index in New South Wales. The discount rate is 4% at the date of initial application. At the date of initial application, 1st January 2019, the CPI of 4th quarter 2018 will be unknown until 29 January 2019. Therefore, ROU lease liability will be recognized without assuming the index review on 1st January 2019. From the second year of the lease payments that depend on CPI reviews need to be revised once the CPI is released after each quarter ends. For example, in this lease scenario, the second year of the lease commences from 1st January 2019. Then the first quarter of year 2019 will be taking CPI of the 4th quarter of year 1, that is 2018. If the fourth quarter of year 1, 2018 is not known yet, then no adjustment is made in the books until the CPI is released. On 29 January 2019, the monthly lease payments of $20,000 will be revised using CPI of quarter 4, 2018, which is 1.67%. And so the revised monthly lease payment will be $20,334. The ROU lease liability will be remeasured subsequently with a corresponding change to the ROU asset. If on transition date, which is 1st January 2019, CPI is unknown for quarter 4 2018, then the initial recognition of ROU asset and lease liability will be determined by taking the monthly lease payments as $20,000 without CPI movement adjustment for quarter 1 2019. On the screen, you can see that our system calculated ROU lease liability and ROU asset based on what is known on the transition date. Once the CPI is known for quarter 4 2018 on 29 January 2019, you will receive an email notification that CPI has been released. You will be asked to log into My Portfolio to approve the CPI reviews. You are required to save the changes and submit the relevant lease identifiers and then press Update All Calculations in My Report IFRS Lease Level to restate ROU asset and lease liability due to CPI adjustments. On the screen, you can see that our system provides a CPI table. As in our example, the CPI pertains to New South Wales. You can type NSW in search bar and review the CPI of fourth quarter 2018. Once the CPI has been approved by you and calculations have been updated, the lease payments will be revised. ROU asset and ROU lease liability will be remeasured on 29 January 2019 by taking the monthly lease payments as $20,334 with CPI movement adjustment for first quarter 2019. On the screen, you can see that our systems restated the ROU lease liability and ROU asset on 29 January 2019. Subsequent to the restatement of ROU lease liability against the ROU asset, an adjustment entry will be required in the books. The adjustment is calculated as the difference between the original monthly lease payments, that is $20,000, and the reassessed monthly lease payments, that is $20,334, discounted at the original discount rate of 4%. As the right of use asset is adjusted on 29 January 2019, the amortization rate will be changed and therefore the depreciation expense will be restated due to adjustment in ROU asset. In this example, as the CPI is known before the month closing, the depreciation expense does not need to be adjusted as the running balance has already incorporated the CPI movement. As the right of use liability is adjusted on 29 January 2019, the daily effective interest rate will be changed and therefore the interest expense will be restated due to adjustment in ROU lease liability. In this example, as the CPI is known before the month closing, The interest expense does not need to be adjusted as the running balance has already incorporated the CPI movement. Furthermore, if you have any questions regarding the restatement of ROU lease liability and ROU asset, then you can contact me through email or via phone. Details are displayed on the screen. Thank you for your time. I hope this webinar has helped you to understand the treatment of variable payments that are based on index or market review that require a reassessment of ROU asset and lease liability.